All our lives, we are told that we can be anything that we want to be as long as we work hard enough at it. In grade school, my teachers hammered this into me. You can be the greatest. Just put in the time and the effort. So I told them I want to be Superman. And they told me to be more realistic. So I said, okay, well, what about Batman? And they said, well, why didn't you try being like a real person? I knew right away that they were lying to me. I couldn't be anything that I wanted to be. All the hard work in the world would never make me a superhero except in my dreams. But as I got older, I once again was seduced by the idea of being the greatest. In junior high and beyond, I decided I wanted to be the greatest basketball player of all time. I played basketball every free minute that I had. I worked harder at it than anything I've ever done in my life. But I'm barely 6 feet tall, and even though I was pretty good, played high school basketball, and was decent amongst my friends, I was far from the greatest. However, in my imagination and in my dreams, when I was shooting myself on the court, I always imagined that I was making the game-winning shot in a championship game. In my imagination, I was great. In real life, not so much. Only in my dreams. Now, I assume that we're all a bit of dreamers. In our heart of hearts, don't we all want to seek greatness at something, to win glory, and have others look up to us? Part of the reasons we watch the Olympics is because we can kind of picture ourselves doing something like that. Jesus' disciples were dreamers as well. We have a very strange story before us this morning. James and John, these two brothers, sons of Zebedee, simple fishermen, who along with Peter were the two of the three disciples that Jesus spent almost all of his time with. One day, these ordinary disciples come to Jesus when the other disciples are not around, and they ask Jesus, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." As a child, I used to ask the same trick question of my parents. "Mom, Dad, will you do something for me?" I think my parents were smarter than Jesus because they always said, "Well, it depends on what you're asking." But Jesus doesn't seem to do that in this text. He just says, unlike my parents, "Sure, what is it that you want?" Now, the brother disciples decide to go for broke. "Jesus, we'd like to be the greatest. We want to be your greatest disciples. Grant that we can sit one on your right and one on your left hand in your glory." Wow, James and John, they wanted to be the greatest of all time. Me, I just dreamed of being the best basketball player. These guys really went for it. We want to be the greatest ever. And one of the most shocking parts of the passage is that Jesus doesn't act anything like my parents. I mean, if I had asked my parents, "Can I have a car?" they would go, "Are you nuts?" No. They would just say, "No, you can't have whatever you want." And it seems like Jesus should say that to them, but he doesn't. He simply looks at his disciples, and I imagine he looks at them with either a sad face of knowing. He says, "You don't really know what you're asking. Are you able to drink of the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with?" And you would expect the disciples to start coming to their senses at this point, as if they would say, maybe there's something wrong in the question we're asking, Jesus. Maybe we don't really want to do that. But they don't get it yet. They're brash, they're arrogant, they're wildly crazy dreamers, and they say, "Sure, we can do that." The disciples remind me a lot of myself when I was a kid. When my teachers or coach said, "You can be whatever you want to be as so long as you work hard," I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And I practiced until I realized that I could only be the greatest in my dreams. But these poor disciples, they have no clue. They just, like me as a child, want to be the greatest. And then, even more shockingly, Jesus says, "Okay, sure, you will drink the cup that I drink, and you will be baptized with my baptism." He doesn't say, "Listen, guys, you're in way over your heads. What are you thinking?" Fine. It's yours. And just like it looks like the disciples are looking at each other like, "Whoa, we got it. We're all set." Jesus lowers the boom. Do you know what this means, to drink of the cup and to be baptized? And now maybe it's sinking into their heads. Maybe we shouldn't have asked this. Jesus clarifies. It's a strange way of responding. Rulers of this world, tyrants of this world, they seek glory. Rulers and tyrants seek greatness. You want to be great? Then you must take a cup of suffering. You must be baptized in suffering. You must drink the cup of service, the baptism of service, not glory by worldly standards. If you wish to truly be great, then be last. And astonishingly, he uses a word that's really troubling to me. He says, you must be a slave to everyone else. You got to lose the race and give up your idea of what glory is. And I bet at that moment they finally got it and wished they'd never asked. In a few weeks, we will hold elections in our country. This past year, we've heard politicians boast about their greatness and of their own glory, and Jesus cares nothing about that. Seems like nothing has changed from his time to ours. If you would be great, be servant of all. From our childhoods, we dream of greatness. And Jesus says, okay, this is the way you do it. Be last, be servant, be slave, be willing to suffer. Give it all up. In the late 19th century, Albert Schweitzer was a dreamer. Schweitzer grew up in a religious and musical home. His father was a Lutheran pastor, his mother was talented in music, and he soon had a passion for music like few others around him. He became one of the greatest organists in Europe. But that wasn't enough. He went on and got a doctorate degree and studied Bach and became a world expert on Bach and wrote many books about Bach. It's astonishing, when I was doing some of the research about Schweitzer, I found that you can actually listen to some of his early recordings. Some of the earliest recordings ever made are Bach playing organ. He was so astonishing, they wanted to record it. But besides being one of the greatest musical talents of his age, Bach decided to get a doctorate in theology. He became a Lutheran pastor like his father and wrote some of the most important books on theology in the late 19th and early 20th century that we still use in biblical studies today. But that wasn't enough. He also studied philosophy, and he wrote a book called Reverence for Life that was so influential. In 1952, he won the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, for his work in philosophy. Despite winning international greatness and glory in the fields of music, philosophy, and religion, it wasn't enough. While serving in his compulsory military service in 1894, Schweitzer went to church and heard this gospel lesson read from Matthew chapter 10. Go and heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Because you have freely received, you should freely give. It bothered him. 2 years later, when he was just 21, he decided that he would continue to study theology, music, and philosophy until he was 30, and then he would dedicate his life to the sufferings of the world. True to his vow, at 30, he got his 4th doctorate in medicine. He resigned his post in teaching at the university against the protests of his family, his friends, and his colleagues, and he became a medical doctor. While studying to become a doctor, he met his wife, Helene Breslau, who had dedicated her life to taking care of orphans. Together, they went to Africa and with their own money founded a hospital in one of the most incredibly difficult situations that was there, taking care of the sick and the needy, and they did this for the rest of their lives. Today, Schweitzer is not so much remembered for the greatness and glory he won as a great musical scholar or a philosopher or a theologian or a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He is remembered for his dedication by making himself last. His greatness is in his service and his willingness to suffer for others. You may wonder what happened to those two poor brothers who asked such a great thing of Jesus. James became an important leader in the church and became the first of the 12 disciples to be martyred not long after he had this conversation with Jesus. He was put to the sword by Herod Agrippa for being compassionate to the people in Jerusalem. John, his brother, is the only one of the 12 apostles who lived out a long life and died a natural death. All the other apostles died martyrs. He dedicated his life to serving others and loving them as Christ had commanded him to. Two crazy dreamers put themselves last and thus drank the cup of service and suffering. We're all dreamers. We dream of earthly glory and greatness, and whether or not we die young or old, a way stretches before us that rises above petty politics, a way that calls us to drink the cup of service and suffering to take care of that neighbor that's near us and far away. A way that does not seek to be first, but that seeks to be last and slave. A way of greatness that we can't fully imagine, but that will make our own brokenness into a gateway of joy. Amen.